Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated, joined by John Bryce of Football Scoop and Pete Sampson of The Athletic. This is Irish Illustrated Insider. It is Monday, January 27th, and there is a whole bunch of talk about Notre Dame's defensive coordinator position, which opened up this past week. Al Golden is now firmly entrenched with the Cincinnati Bengals, and Notre Dame has an opening. We were talking about Jim Leonard the other day. Suddenly, last night, Pete Sampson comes up with some information that gets me awake and moving again, and it had to do with Chris Ash, the former defensive coordinator at Ohio State, a couple different places, head coach at Rutgers. He's suddenly in play. How does that impact Mike Mickens as the co-coordinator, et cetera? I'm going to throw it over to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't. I think John, you reported this too. Like the expectation is that Mike Mickens will stay. Chris Ash's background is in defensive backs. There were, I think, from the beginning there were four names that I was told were in play: Brian Haynes, Chris Ash, Joe Rossi, and Jim Leonard. And I think that Haynes has made his intentions pretty clear with signing a second new contract with Indiana in what the last like 2 months, maybe less.
Yes, I think, yeah.
Yeah. I get the impression that Jim Leonard is more of an NFL guy at this point. And then Joe Rossi's still hanging around from Minnesota. The last time the defensive coordinator job's open now at Michigan State. He's somebody that Marcus Freeman evaluated 3 years ago and liked. So that's where we are. But I think that Chris Ash has a lot of, from a resume perspective, probably as similar to Al Golden as you're going to find. But that's where things are. I was told last night the deal's not done, but when people start telling you someone has emerged as a strong candidate, that's I think a pretty good indication of where things are headed.
Let me interject here, Pete. Did Rossi not want to leave Michigan State because he was only there for a year?
Oh no, I think that Rossi's sort of still there.
Oh,
Um, you
because
know, that,
that would be my choice. It was my choice a couple years back. I
yeah,
think that he's been a real strong candidate.
yeah.
Michigan State struggled last year. That happens with first year coordinators. I'm confident that that will turn around. But JB, what do you got?
Yeah, very, very similar to Pete. Chris Ash, I talked to some folks in Columbus who really enjoyed working with him. He brings that elite college experience from the SEC, from Texas, from Ohio State. He's got the NFL pedigree from the last four or so seasons in the NFL. Not in a full-time coaching role this past year with the Jaguars, I believe, but still in that franchise and still a part of their operations there. As Pete noted, he has very much been a defensive secondary type of coach.
Exclusively, actually.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
exclusively that. Yep.
yeah. There's optimism that they can keep Mickens in the fold. I know that is Notre Dame's preference very much. And yeah, like Pete said, when you hear targeted, then that means almost every single time that an offer is forthcoming and that they will try to work out a deal from that point forward.
They,
And with Chris Ash, he's not going to make as much as Al Golden was making. Just different mathematics involved there, but that means you can probably give Mike Mickens a raise as well as a promotion and title and try to keep him around and keep growing him because we've heard Marcus Freeman, both prompted and unprompted, sing the virtues of Mike Mickens as a defensive coordinator. And, much like I believe Dylan McCullough will be a head coach, a matter of when, not if, it's very similar with Mike Mickens, in my opinion.
think the one thing the couple of differences with the Golden is, I mean, Golden was coming off the Super Bowl. That's a pretty nice Super Bowl bump as opposed to a couple of failed stints at Jacksonville where everything went absolutely haywire south under his head coach, and Las Vegas for when you weren't retained by Antonio Pierce. Also, Al Golden turned around one of the moribund programs in the history of college football in Temple, and I think Chris Ash fell victim to one in Rutgers.
Yep.
It's not his fault. Rutgers didn't work out. It was his fault. He took the job for money because Rutgers is hard to go win at. It's like when you go to IU, Temple, or Rutgers, you got a very small list of people that made it work as opposed to people that didn't make it work. And I think Ash just fell on the ladder. I think the interesting thing is I talked to Steve Hellwagon, who covers Ohio State, about Ash, and his exact words, going to Monday Musings, so we'll go ahead and rip that away from Monday Musings again. He was great at Ohio State, absolutely instrumental in the 2014 national championship. He brought something he called the difference, which was basically teaching guys how to win one-on-one battles with their hands. That improved the secondary, and it improved tackling across the board. So I found that interesting. He was also very good at Wisconsin, and I think the drawback is I just mentioned his last success was a decade ago.
Yeah, and that's a little bit different than, like, people were 3 years ago were concerned about the fact that Golden had not been a defensive coordinator. This is a little bit more acute than that. And as a head coach, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to win at Rutgers.
Yeah.
It's also difficult to keep your job when you lose to Ohio State 58-0, Michigan 78-0, Michigan State 49-0, Penn State 39-0, and that was in his first year, and there were more along the way. But it was he took over a losing program, but they had success prior to that. Hey, man, they went to the Pinstripe Bowl. They played against Notre Dame, so there had been some success there. But I guess what I want to, and I brought this up. I started a thread on our message board, and I knew it was going to take off, but I felt it was important to state that the issue with Chris Ash should not be, scheme or fronts or stuff like that. The guy's got enough football knowledge. My question is he a cultural fit for Notre Dame? And that's especially important following Al Golden, because Al Golden came in and whatever his attitude was when he first arrived, I don't know, but I mean, he humbled himself and he became a collaborator with the players. It wasn't my way or the highway kind of approach. And I know that Ash was with Urban Meyer at a couple of different stops, which is certainly the way Urban Meyer tended to run his camp. So I'm just saying cultural fit. He needs to be the right kind of cultural fit, and has to kind of follow the blueprint that Al Golden created, because this guy's going to be taking over a defense that was coached by Golden and coached it in a much different way than the my way or highway that the Urban Meyer camp would do it.
And I think this is where it comes in, and we've all heard it, but I've heard it directly from current members of the coaching staff about Marcus Freeman just being a leader of men. And I think that once Al Golden became immersed in that and saw that Marcus Freeman is a natural leader of men, that helped Al Golden transition. I know Pete has some fabulous insight on this if he doesn't mind sharing it. I know we were talking about it before we went on camera, so I think he's okay with sharing it. If not, then I've screwed up, Pete, and I apologize. But
just don't share it, Pete. It's pretty simple.
Yeah,
it's going to be some awkward.
Yeah, we all heard some stuff. I mean, Al Golden had become accustomed to the NFL life when he first got to Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I think it's with Golden when he got here, it wasn't like an automatic, all right, I'm just going to buy into what Marcus Freeman is selling. And I'm not sure Marcus Freeman knew what Marcus Freeman was necessarily selling at that point.
That's true.
So that like one of the big differences between Golden and Ash would be Marcus Freeman, like a third-year head coach coming off the national title game versus a first-year head coach who is about to lose to Marshall. So I just think that if they hired Chris Ash and he came in here with more of, like, dare I say, a Van Gorder attitude where I'm going to fix this, or like it's my way or the highway, then I would say that's sort of a shame on Marcus Freeman. That would be a bad hire. If you looked at the job here and it was like you went from Mike Elko to Clark Lee to Marcus Freeman to Al Golden, you went to the college football playoff 3 times, played for the national title once.
Yep.
If Chris Ash comes in and is like, well, I'm going to fix Notre Dame's defense, well, like that. If you said that in a job interview, that would be the last question I would need to ask. So I would hope that if it's Ash, they would come here and it wouldn't be my way or the highway. Like, he wouldn't take after Urban Meyer when you're working for Marcus Freeman. You would take after Marcus Freeman when you're working for Marcus Freeman. At that point, you got to be a little bit more flexible if you're Chris Ash.
Yeah, it's interesting because other than Urban Meyer, remember, he also worked for Tom Herman, who is very much my way or the highway type
also
of guy,
not
too.
very Marcus Freeman-esque.
Also not very Marcus Freeman-esque. I don't know. I was just about to say Chip Long. I'm messing up here.
Also not Marcus Freeman-esque.
No, San Diego State. Why can't I get the quarterback's name? Long. Chuck Long.
Chuck Long.
He worked for Chuck Long as well. I don't think he is that type, actually. But yeah, you would assume that that would not be the approach to take. It's not really every once in a while. I mean, Van Gorder took the wrong approach, but they needed a guy. I wrote about this too. They needed a guy to teach 4-3 because they no longer had personnel for 3-4 back then. They did not have Lewis Nix anymore. They had no nose tackles. So fast forward to now, just kidding. But what you need to do is, I mean, all he preaches is 4-3 attacking defense, and that's what Marcus Freeman wants. I put on our message board a link to all the tapes that Chris Ash has out there about how to teach the 4-3 wildly aggressive attacking style. So obviously Marcus wants that, and yeah, as Pete said, if you come in here trying to fix things, it'll last a year, and we'll know. It'll last
Yeah.
1 year if you try to fix things that are broken.
A couple quotes here from Urban Meyer, and this is when he hired Chris Ash. The top coordinator hire to me in all of football was Chris Ash. Called him one of the best coaches I've ever been around. And Tom Herman said he's as good a defensive coach as I've ever been around. So that was my whole point about this isn't about scheme. I mean, and you're right, Tim. I mean, it does match what he wants to do. It's very aggressive. He likes bigger cornerbacks, which is certainly something that Notre Dame
We all
has
do
gone
now.
to. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, he used a 4-3 at Wisconsin. He was at Arkansas, Ohio State. That's what he did. He collaborated with Luke Fickell at Ohio State. He definitely loves to bring the pressure. So I mean, those things are all good. And Pete, you're right. I mean, he has to adapt to the culture at Notre Dame, and I assume that Marcus Freeman, if he ultimately chooses him, which he may have already or is in the process, I'm sure that Marcus Freeman is convinced that that's exactly what's going to happen. So
And very,
if he's
very
happy,
quickly
I'm
on that,
happy.
very quickly on Ash, we can come up with a lot of bad stats too from Rutgers and Texas and Arkansas, but they were really good at Wisconsin and Ohio State. And it should be pointed out, I mean, Ohio State's always had plenty of talent. And in 2013, although that was a bit of a dip, they had 9 interceptions and finished 83rd in pass efficiency defense. In 2014, they won the national championship and finished 13th in pass efficiency defense and intercepted 24 passes. So he does know how to teach the back end. And now they have, interestingly enough, 2 guys that know how to teach the back end. So it'll be an interesting division of labor. Obviously, that Mickens and Ash are co-defensive coordinators and now co-passing game coordinator, defensive passing game coordinator experts. I don't know how that one works, but it would mean Marty Biagi will help out with another position group, probably on the offensive side at this point, because he did a great job as special teams coordinator. But now you don't need Biagi working with safeties quite clearly.
Yeah, they did his first year with Fickle at Ohio State. They had 45 sacks, so I mean they hit the ground running. And I want to point this out because every time there's an opening, everybody goes to the bios and reads them. And in his year at Texas, they gave up 28 points a game. You cannot evaluate a coordinator without looking at or even a head coach for that matter, without looking at the year before they arrived. I mean, because if it was awful the year before, it can be very difficult if you don't have the personnel to turn around in 1 year, really, it's not 1 year, it's in a couple of months you have to turn it around. So that, I mean, I would just remind people that when you're bio scouting, which everybody does today, keep in mind what he took over because that plays a role as well. All right, guys, let's move on to Notre Dame lost Chad Bowden to USC. He got overtures from Michigan last year and USC this year. And for those that are out there that are calling Bowden a traitor because it's 2 Notre Dame rivals, look, he can't control who's after him. He's good at what he does. He did a great job while he was here. Michigan approached him, USC approached him. He didn't choose them; they chose him. And USC made him an offer that he absolutely could not refuse. Notre Dame, I assume, looks at that as money that can be distributed differently or in a better way or whatever. But he got a great offer, and good for Chad Bowden.
Yeah, and one of the things I actually just found out about over the weekend that I was unaware is Oklahoma has an opening for general manager, and Oklahoma had made a run recently at Bowden, and he had rebuffed their interest. USC has been looking for a GM for quite some time now. They pursued Courtney Morgan from Alabama really, really hard, made a couple of different runs at him. And when they couldn't pry Courtney away from the Crimson Tide, and by the way, Courtney is about to get mega paid, and he already had broken the market last August when he got a 3-year deal worth approximately 800, 850, and 900 over the course of his term. Then they came hard after Chad Bowden, and I believe it's a 3-year deal. The expectation is that it's a 3-year deal. It's worth north of $1 million per year. Plus, he'll have some bonus incentives tied to that, is my understanding. And I know people are like, "Oh, cost of living," but and all of that. It's still a substantial raise. It's still going to be a lot more money in the pocket of a guy who's been married for 7 months now, who got married at the end of May or whatever it was. And so, you guys know I like looking at contracts. I like diving into that stuff. I'm not very good at math, but I'm a contract nerd. And so I did look up like cost of living and all that stuff. And Chad was making around 275 to 300 at Notre Dame. Means he would need to make about 455 in LA to have level money. And he's obviously making almost or right around 700,000 more than 455 out in LA. So that's significant. Notre Dame has a good system. There's more resources in place now than when Bowden took over the job. Matt Jansen is a guy that Marcus Freeman has called his secret weapon before. He's got NFL experience. He's an incredibly vital part of that staff that does a lot for Notre Dame behind the scenes, whether it's scouting upcoming opponents or whether it's scouting guys in the portal or looking at potential recruits. And it's an attractive job. This is a much more attractive job because of the work that Bowden did than it was when Bowden first arrived, in my opinion.
Matt Jansen angle is interesting because I continue to believe firmly, and I was careful to say this because I thought Chad Bowden was one of the more important people to retain prior to the 2023 season. We knew that to be factual from Marcus Freeman. I still think it's got to be 2 jobs in the future: GM, which would be more of the Matt Jansen angle, and recruiting coordinator, which is where the part that Chad Bowden was so well known for. I think that's the future of it. Whether they can pivot to do that right away or not, they don't have to, because I mean they technically had until about the spring to make this work. In fact, that's exactly what they have until the spring to make this work. I think it's got to be 2 positions in the future, and it's hard to change it. Like if you have Jansen hired at the exact same role as Chad Bowden, it's hard to tell him a year later, "Hey, we think this should be a double role, and we're going to cut your money and hire somebody else too." So it's really difficult to do it right there, but they do have a little bit of time. I don't think this was a massive, massive, massive surprise. So they can, Chad Bowden did a great job, and that role, 2 things are true. He did a great job, and that role existed for 2 years. So you can find someone else too.
Yeah. I want you to answer this, John, but we did have a question from Shy 43 that I want to pull up from section 2. What are the differences between director of recruiting and a college general manager? And feel free to, offer what else you got there.
Yeah, well, I think the big difference right now would be that with the general manager, you're doing more of the behind the scenes NIL work, particularly as you're dealing with guys in the portal. You're dealing with more of the player agents, and there's been a proliferation of player agents at the collegiate level, especially in the last 3 years. You're working hand in hand with your NIL, which Notre Dame has now moved in-house, shifted away from the fund and moved in-house. I think it's called Rally. And Chad Bowden was working directly with them, literally, sometimes I think even traveling together when they were meeting with guys in the portal or meeting with them on campus when portal guys were visiting and dealing with it from there. Director of recruiting, I think, is more going to be high school based. You're going to handle more of your on-campus logistics. You're going to handle more of identifying coaches or identifying prospects with your support staff and then distributing those prospects to the coaches and having the coaches then evaluate them and decide which ones you want to offer together. The general manager is a far more all-encompassing role right now, and it's still a bit nebulous at the college level because Austin Thomas was the first GM maybe 6 or 7 years ago, but that predated NIL. So it was a completely different thing then than what it is now.
Yeah,
I will say, again, this comes from AFCA, where I had dinner with some multiple power conference GMs and visited with a lot of different coaches and things. There's no more exploding area in all of college athletics than the general manager role. And it's happening in basketball more now. College basketball is still behind college football from a GM standpoint, but it's happening more in that regard. And there's no area where the salaries are exploding more. When Notre Dame convinced Bowden not to go to Michigan last year, and it should be noted, he left money on the table from Michigan, took less to stay loyal and stay at Notre Dame. But when they bumped him up to around 275 or three, that was really good. That was making more than a number of guys in the SEC. Then Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin went and hired Billy Glasscock away from Texas, gave him 450 or 500,000 to pull him away from there. He'd maybe been around 3 or 350 at Texas. And now it's exploding even more. And I wrote this on Football Scoop when Bowden left on Friday. Marshall Malchow at Oregon is widely considered one of the best in the business. He's getting ready to absolutely get paid. He'll be right around that 900 to 1.2 million range.
People are going to be thanking Bowden.
Yeah.
These guys are going to be.
Yeah, it's my understanding that Ohio State is about to significantly reward their guys. Texas just gave Brandon Harris a huge new raise. Courtney Morgan, aforementioned, who turned down USC, is about to get a raise again from Alabama, I'm told. So I know that's probably a little bit more than what you would ask. I just wanted to paint as complete a picture.
No, that's what we wanted. Yeah.
General manager, a lot different. General manager, a lot different than director of recruiting. Director of recruiting, again, you're going to be poring over the prospects more. You're going to be meeting with your support staff, guys like Caleb Davis and Carter Allman and Zaire and all of those folks, and then going from there.
Pete, jump in here because I mean, to both these guys' points, it's a two-person job. There's a talent evaluator and there's the NIL money part of it. Those are two completely different things.
Yeah, and I with Chad, I feel like his strength was more like relations than any kind of evaluation. Like I don't think I would look at Chad Bowden and be like, well, his evaluation of Leonard Moore was the difference there.
No,
like,
I agree with that.
That's Mike Mickens. It's Matt Jansen to a certain extent. So I think Chad actually knitted that department together pretty well. The market is what the market is. But I was flat out told, like, if Notre Dame wanted to match for Bowden, they would have, and they didn't. So maybe Marcus has just a different idea of like where this is going to go. They had been together for quite a while, going back to Cincinnati. So I think Chad did a nice job in his 4 years here now total. Came with Marcus as defensive coordinator. But I read in another publication that there was a recruiting analyst that said Chad Bowden replacing him was as important as replacing Al Golden. I would just like to push back on that notion. I realize general managers are important, but like we're not to the point where they are on the same par as actual coordinators.
It's not a defined position yet, is what we're saying. His general manager role changed from probably year 1.5 to year 2.5, 3 at Notre Dame. I mean, he must have taken on a greater role because this had to be 2 years ago, not 3. When we said on the podcast, it had to be because Notre Dame was not involved in NIL enough yet. So let's say 2.5 years ago, I said college football is going to need a general manager. And we asked Marcus Freeman, do you need a general manager? And he said, no, I'm the general manager. Immediately Chad Bowden was hired to be a general manager after that. So, it's an evolving position that I think will now continue to evolve.
You made a great point, T.O., and talking, and Pete as well, about Chad sort of knitting things together and being so relationship based. And you wonder, as the money grows, if the House settlement is formally pushed through in April and the revenue distribution begins in earnest later in the year, do you take a more dispassionate approach to that position and have it be somebody who's not inclined with all the family? Look, I sat there in the College Football Hall of Fame last Sunday night, I guess it was. Notre Dame had a special event there, and Christian Gray's mom was the keynote speaker, and she point blank said the only reason her son is at Notre Dame instead of LSU is because Chad Bowden drove him all over campus on one of his 7 visits, the last one, I believe, and his girlfriend had broken up with him that day, and Christian Gray wore sunglasses all over campus so people couldn't see him crying, and Chad Bowden drove him around and had a life talk with him. And then they picked up Mike Mickens, and the 3 of them drove around all over campus on a golf cart and had a life talk with him. And that's the reason why. So moving forward, I think because it's going to become more mechanical, less emotional, you've got to have somebody that's going to be able to make some hard decisions. That maybe you sign a guy and he's slotted to get $150,000 in year one from a revenue sharing agreement, and after that first year you're like, we're not getting 150K value out of you. You can stay and be on scholarship and take a reduction, or you can go into the transfer portal. I think that's going to be a key next step to watch and monitor as the House settlement unfolds. Go ahead, T.O.
Screaming it from the mountaintops. Thank you, John Bryce. You need a dispassionate voice at GM rather than someone who, let's say Christian Gray wasn't good right now, but he was okay. Let's say he was not as good as Jaden Mickey. How hard would it be for Chad after all that went down to say, you know what, Marcus, he's not worth $150,000? It'd be really, really, really hard because
You're
he's a human, and
absolutely
that's
right,
human
Tim.
nature. You need the dude over here that doesn't know Christian Gray. Thankfully,
Right.
Christian Gray's good, and he needs to be on the team.
So two positions. We're in agreement. Looking to upgrade your wardrobe. Founded by Notre Dame alum Gu Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. Segment 2 is burning up the boards, and that is next.
Welcome back to segment 2. We call it Burning Up the Boards. Our first question is from KevKev561, not to be confused with new portal transfer Ty Washington 561. What made Al Golden so successful was his multiple advanced schemes. Is there a corollary there with Chris Ash and what he ran at Ohio State?
Is Ty Washington really is it 561?
It's Ty. So
Okay.
Kev and
Oh,
Ty.
I got you. I mean, a lot of things. I think we touched on the first segment. Look, they'll change fronts, of course. Everybody does that today, but he's a 4 down lineman guy. Very zone blitzes. Here's a quote from him: "Zone blitzes are like snakes in the grass. You never know when one is going to come up and bite you." So bringing pressures. I don't know if they bring more pressures from the third level, but definitely that was something that Al Golden did and liked, and will continue to do that on the NFL level. But yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of similarities, both that really like to be very aggressive with what they do up front.
Yeah,
I think the Al Golden schemes is a unique.
He was
it's a
great.
unique trait. Yeah, he's great at it. It's a unique trait.
He
that I
really
don't
is.
think I mean, great defensive coordinators don't have to have that, but that was part of what made him great. It's probably the best way. And it's usage of personnel. You can't do any of that stuff if your corners are corners from 2014. You couldn't.
No, but
Al Golden couldn't run his defense with that defense.
I
It's
saw
just
some
not
videos
possible.
I saw some videos with Ash, and I think it was Urban Meyer that was talking about, okay, there are these various blitzes, these two guys coming, one guy from this guy, guy from this side. There's a variety of approaches to it, and you just tap into it. Al Golden did about as well as anybody,
Yeah.
and I would imagine that Chris Ash is cut from that same cloth.
I would there's something that popped in my head. I remember talking to Jared Patterson earlier this year about this team, and he's like, "I really think Al Golden is a secret weapon." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, in college, protection rules are written one way, in the NFL, they're written another." And so Al Golden knew how to manipulate the difference between those two protection rules because he knew how it would be taught in college versus the pros, and how to pull the levers to make sort of make teams break their own protection rules.
Wow, that's some serious stuff there, man. That's
I
good
would
stuff.
think that Chris Ash being in the NFL for the last 3+ years would have a similar background on that. I think that I realize when you hire someone for the NFL, we think about it from a recruiting point of view, but I think from a schematic point of view, as long as you're able to teach it, there's some real advantage there of just understanding how college teams protect their quarterbacks and how they don't, and how to make that work for you as a defensive coordinator.
Very quickly, Tim and JB, the most poignant's the wrong word. Important thing Al Golden, I think, ever said was around the end of year 2, so end of 2023, when he said, "I installed everything in 2022. It was overload. We didn't need it because we weren't playing teams that ran that stuff. So for 2023, I was prepared to install what we need for every team we're playing this season. And I think that is a unique challenge for a guy coming in because you want to teach all your stuff. Well, if you're teaching all your stuff and that you're trying to defend something you're not even going to come close to seeing,
That's a good point.
they're still college. They're smart college players, but they're still college players. You can't do everything.
Well, and also I think Notre Dame is unique in that typically the Irish don't have a great number of same opponents year over year. And so I think that makes preparation a little bit more unique in that regard. And, okay, so they got Purdue back on the schedule, but it's entirely new regime and new scheme at Purdue. Then you're adding Arkansas and Boise State, among others, to the schedule. You're adding, I think, Syracuse and Boston College and some of that. So there's not just a tremendous amount of opponent carryover from one year to the next. And then for Al Golden, I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody better at in-game adjustments. Now, it didn't particularly bear out a week ago today over the course of that game because Ohio State was just that good. But how many times did we talk to players who said they've never seen a staff or never been a part of a group of people that make halftime adjustments the way that Al Golden did?
In game, John. You're in game though. He did them. He said halftime's too late. Like Clark Lee was great halftime. Al was okay. This first drive just caught us off guard. Now we're gonna do this, and this, and they would pick it up. It was impressive.
Well, and John, to your point, I mean, I know that Notre Dame they caused the fumble, which really helped, but Notre Dame made their comeback when they were able to slow Ohio State down a little bit in the second half after the first drive of the second half. So it was a tough ask, but they did at a certain point, they did finally slow them down. We have a question from Terry Benedict. What is the status of Jeremiah Love heading into the offseason?
We have an official status other than he sprained his knee against USC.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't.
I haven't heard anything about requiring surgery. He had a sprained knee, and there was no time for him to recover. It's good. It's a legitimate question, but
yeah, it sure is. But I bet he'd be great right now if he never had to play after that sprained knee, and instead he played 4 high leverage games.
Yeah. I don't get the sense that there's any surgery required there, but there's definitely a lot of rest and recuperation required. So this is a good time for that.
It's going to be a light spring for
goodness sakes. Yeah.
I was going to say
no carries.
Yeah, it'd be a heavy dose of Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young among others.
J Love, hold this bag, will you? Question from Clay. He's holding the bag, all right.
Yep.
Hey, there's a zero begrudgment from his bag from any of us. That's for
it's a full bag that he's holding. Yeah. Question from K Garrity on the K Garrity 8. I'm sorry. On the surface, each of the portal departures makes sense. Do you know if there was if there was a particular portal entry that Notre Dame didn't see coming, or that they really tried to encourage to stay?
I mean, they had to see the 4 graduating players coming. So like Pendleton, when he announced, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But then I just thought Coogan was going to stay. Why I thought maybe Pendleton was the reaction to, all right, one of those guys is staying, so now I'm going to go. That would be the only one that could have surprised him. I mean, Spindler was a...
We talked about Coogan and Spindler during the season.
We talked about Spindler in August. I mean, he did Notre Dame a solid by not going anywhere at that point because that was a very big possibility. If he pulled a Jaden Mickey, that would have been a problem during this football season.
Could have been close.
I mean, it was very close. He was a game away.
Weird how the Purdue game impacted the season at a couple positions.
Yes. Pendleton was the only one that's a surprise, other than maybe Charlie Selna. I'm not sure that could be another one, too.
I was just going to say that.
I mean, I would flip this question around and be like, would Notre Dame have been surprised that more people didn't go in?
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm surprised it's not bigger than this so far.
Yeah. And this is it. Like, I think today is the end of the 48 hours, if I'm not mistaken.
It's 2 positions right now. O-line and wide receiver.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think until 5 o'clock today, I believe, Pete, to your point, they could declare all the way through Saturday, and then Notre Dame gets 48 hours from that point in time to officially enter anyone into the portal.
So we're not jinxing anything here right now.
No. Priester's in charge of jinxes.
Jeremiah Love drops the bag.
But I mean, I not too much surprise at Pendleton. And I will say quickly, one reason I think that Notre Dame hasn't had a greater proliferation of guys entering the portal is because Notre Dame made it clear over the by the end of the regular season and through this playoff run, Notre Dame made it clear to guys they intended to take NIL money and reinvest in the current roster, in addition to some specific augmentation via the portal. So Pendleton, look, it's a logjam. How many guys can Notre Dame put at guard right now and moving forward, even without Pendleton, that you think they're going to be pretty darn good? And in talking to people in Knoxville over the weekend and at the end of last week, he got paid very, very well. It's my understanding that I thought I was initially told between 250 and 275,000. And then I did some more checking and talked to some media guys down there that are well versed with Tennessee's collective, and they indicated they thought that Pendleton stood to have a deal worth about 400,000 at Tennessee. And Tennessee, I believe, lost both of its starting guards and their top backup at guard. So he'll walk in as long as he's healthy and pretty much be a day one starter.
Well, he made a smart move then. That was a good move on his part.
From Nick Gruby, in 2021, Marcus Freeman ran more 3-down defensive lineman sets than I felt Golden ran during his tenure. If ND were to switch to more of a 3-3-5 scheme, who on the current roster benefits the most? This seems highly unlikely unless a surprise hire is made.
Yeah, that I didn't exactly know which way the commentary would go, although I should have anticipated it. Sean Sevillano would benefit
Your guy.
greatly with a 3-man front.
You just included that so you could mention Sean Sevillano on another podcast.
I did. I think it's fun to say his name. No, he would. I mean, he would benefit the most, right?
That's about it, to be honest with you. Is going to benefit
I mean,
the most.
maybe Rubio.
Bryce Young can be just fine in the Stephon Tuitt strong side defensive end role at third down.
Rubio is more 3 technique really because he's more mobile than that. But in that kind of, and he was at 316. That's what I had him listed before the season. If they were to go in that direction, they're not. But I mean, if they were to go in that direction, he could probably get up to 320, 325 and have a chance to be a pretty good nose tackle.
Pete, you like the Stephon Tuitt, Bryce Young, strong side defensive end possibly though, right?
They're exactly the same.
I guess. Next question. Irish from A2. Is it okay to be disappointed in the basketball team's performance this year? I didn't read all these questions. The defense has taken a big step back. Top 40 of the country last year, back to 150th in the nation so far.
Yeah, they had a big win over Virginia at Virginia, but boy, Virginia is not very good. Things have really changed there. The roster is in bad shape. They lost Tony, their head coach. Why am I not?
Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett.
Yeah.
Tony
Does
Bennett.
not like NIL.
Yeah.
Nor does Mike Bragg, if you saw that article.
And so he ran from that. I think it's disappointing because there was such a great commitment to defense last year. They made such improvement. And then over the offseason with the change of the roster, it was a greater commitment toward offense and the defense suffered. I mean, and really Micah Shrewsbury has pretty much just admitted that they were going to take a more offensive approach to things. And then Marcus Burton was injured and that screws everything up on both ends of the court, but especially the offensive end. But yeah, I mean, they're bad. They're not very good on defense. It was a big win the other night. They're going to have to string some together because they're 3-5 in the conference.
Yeah, I'll be there tomorrow night for that game. I think it's fair to call it a disappointment because of how bad they've been in close games overall. They have 7 losses by single digits. That's what's bothersome to me. I thought they blew the North Carolina game badly, and you can argue whether or not there maybe should have been a foul call as Notre Dame drove to the rack at the end of that game. But you're at home. You don't let them get that 3-pointer off. There's been a couple other late game situations that I think have been disappointing. So yeah, I thought they could have been 5-3 right now in the league instead of 3-5, and that changes perception a hell of a lot.
Our next question from Victory Gin, Tim Priester. When does spring ball start?
I put in an inquiry to Notre Dame today, and this was the response. We are still working through finalizing the schedule now that the season extended so long. I will get you an answer ASAP. And so therefore we will get our listeners an answer as soon as we get that answer. But too early to know now, man.
Not breaking news as much.
No, but the game was like, it was literally a week ago tonight. So they haven't quite gotten there because they lost Chad Bowden, they lost their coordinator, and they haven't made that decision yet. However, we should note, Tim, Easter is April 20th.
Easter is, the 20th.
Okay, so it won't be on the 19th. The spring game won't be on the 19th.
Right.
And because the season was late, the spring game probably won't be on April 12th. So you could probably anticipate the spring game being on the 26th of April?
We are hoping that is the case. Otherwise, we have a spring game conflict. So let's go April 26th. That'd be a pretty big deal.
All right, that's what we have. We have a question from W. Carey 14. Why does it continue to feel like off the field happenings, recruiting, transfer portal restrictions, staff moves, etc., are the biggest detriment to Notre Dame sustaining its place among college football's elites? I thought Pete Bavacqua said he was maniacally obsessed with winning a title. If that is true, wouldn't these deficiencies be resolved in a much more rapid manner?
I love your cadence and tone.
I
in
know.
asking that question.
I
It was
knew
so
you were,
good.
I knew you were reacting to it because you were like, "That's a Priester special choice of question."
Oh,
I should have read
man.
this question.
I would just say, like, look, here's the deal. Like, Notre Dame football was put itself on a billboard for the last month. And the rest of college football was like, I want some of that. So the fact that other programs are like, I'm going to go get some of that, shouldn't really be that big of a surprise. I mean, that happens at every level of sports. If you win, people want to figure out why you're winning and hire the people or sign the people that helped you win. So the fact that that's going on, not that big of a surprise. I think this is maybe more of a sensitive timing question. Like if Malachi Fields and Devonta Smith were announced today, would this question still be asked? Probably not. But those guys were announced in December when there were more important things that we were focused on. So I don't see much of an issue here at all. I think Pete Bavacqua can stand very comfortably by his maniacally obsessed comment and not have it feel like they're operating sort of counterintuitively to that.
Yeah, this is not isolated to Notre Dame. And a couple of points here, and I've said this on the podcast before. If you have a staff that people aren't trying to hire, you probably suck and aren't going to have a staff for very long because you're going to be looking for a job. And number two, I would point out Ohio State just won the Natty and lost its defensive coordinator to its second biggest rival.
The day before they're supposed to have a parade or whatever they do there in Columbus, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
after Penn State loses their defensive coordinator to Clemson.
Right. And Knowles was a huge reason they won the Natty and didn't even bother with the celebration.
So
you
really timed it badly, actually. Like,
no, I'm told he was
on purpose. On purpose.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
No,
yeah,
I mean, he said, "This is what I'm
clearly.
going to do to you," and left. Like that is a move and a half right there. My opinion of what W. Carey is asking is that Notre Dame lost Al Golden, and everything else happens in college football every single season. This transfer portal attrition is zero compared to what people perceived it to be last year. Nothing.
Good. Like their portal, like
they were letting all of them go.
The
Maybe they wanted Pendleton to come back because he's a young player that could be there longer, but they would have to pay him for 3 years. Why would you want him back?
Steve Angeli could have entered the portal.
Right.
David Snead could have entered the portal.
Notre Dame's brand new, doesn't exist yet general manager looked and he was like, "Go ahead, guys. Go ahead. Anthony Knapp, Sullivan Absher, Kirby Lambert. They're in. Next guy's in. We're going to play football right now." Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas, wonderful niche players that are receivers number 6 and 7 on the team.
And you expect Micah Gilbert to step forward. You expect
and
Logan Saldate to step
Jaden
forward.
Thomas
you
money right now. He did a good job. He helped your team
to step forward. This is not a push button game. This is real life, and everybody's competing against each other. I knew you'd like that question, Samson. That's why. That's why I chose it, and that's why
but you had to ask it. If O'Malley if O'Malley asked it, would have totally lost.
I would have cut.
The gravitas of Priester's voice for that question was necessary for sure. There was
I mean, in all seriousness, man, this stuff is not that easy. Everybody's competing against everybody. There's good news and bad news, and Pete, you're right. I mean, some of those announcements, I wouldn't say they got lost, but Notre Dame was in the midst of their playoff run, and so it was less important. Imagine if Devontae Smith was announced now, and it's like, oh my God, look at that. Look how aggressive and strong that dude is. They're going to plug him in at nickelback. That got lost. I don't even know when that came, which game that was, before or after Georgia, or I'm not sure. But
I think it was before Indiana. Yeah.
Probably.
We were debating how big the Indiana game was in the history of South Bend. Devontae Smith signs. I don't care. We got an Alabama player.
Not that Devontae Smith.
No, that is still an issue for me.
Final
question. Oh,
To
sorry,
your point,
go, JD.
no, I was just going to say real quickly, Pete, you were talking about how perfect it was that Priester read that question. You had already referenced the Costanza jerk store.
Yeah.
That would have been a perfect time to read that question in the form of George Costanza giving his jerk store dissertation.
Oh.
And if people are wondering why they missed Jerk Story, it was indeed at the halftime break when something was said that should not have been said at the halftime break. So if Jack Freeman ever releases the outtakes, I'll be out of a job. Final question. Northside 55. Any intel on who the 12th opponent will be for 2025?
Yes. Do we know this? I don't know that it's a fact.
We know more than we do the spring game, apparently. Let's go. Fire it up.
This is true. This is true. That's because the game is next fall, not the end of April. It is Stanford. I don't know if it's official that they're
We
going
don't
to
know
play
this
in
officially yet. No.
Yeah.
we don't know it's official that they're going to play in the Rose Bowl.
But it'd be cool.
But it would be cool, and
Great
that
idea.
sounds like that is a possibility. I probably should have checked with somebody before we actually asked this question.
Too late.
but
That's why. That's
is
why
too
every
late.
once in a while we have
Right.
halftime.
So now we will be asked, when do you expect the game against Stanford in the Rose Bowl to be announced? Which I don't know. And we
It
don't
does,
know,
I mean, it does explain like the complications of
certainly.
not announcing this, right?
Certainly.
I mean, it
Clearly.
makes sense.
It would be cool. And who has been in the actual Rose Bowl facility itself? JB has. Tim, you have not.
No.
We
I
were
didn't even
there-
get to go to the fake Rose Bowl in Dallas.
I don't even consider that wasn't the Rose Bowl. That was a game played in Dallas.
Who said that on the team? Because I totally agreed with him. I forget who it was. Was it Clarence Lewis? It might have been. No, he's a freshman. No way. Someone on the team said, I've been waiting to play my whole life in the Rose Bowl, and it's in Dallas. I was like, yes, that's what I feel like, but I'm not in Dallas. So
Yeah, we've been there. The other three of us have been there, but it was, well, for Pete and I, it was Notre Dame UCLA. And JB, what were you?
What a game that was.
I did a Tennessee UCLA game out
Oh,
there
okay.
to
Okay.
open season on Labor Day night.
Hey, JB, in that game, did UCLA have the worst quarterback you've ever seen in the history of sports play in the game and then go on to a 15-year NFL career like it did for Pete Sampson and Tim Priester? Because that was a strange moment. There was no. McLeod Bethel Thompson has looked, no one's ever looked worse. And I think he may have just retired from the NFL.
Yeah. That's the game, though, that Arian Foster, I think, had a very catastrophic fumble for the Vols. And then obviously he went on to become a all-pro running back who multiple times led the NFL in rushing yardage.
Yeah,
Arian Foster would have had a good NIL career had that existed back in his day.
For Pete and myself, it was the coronation of Maurice Crum in the College Football Hall of Fame.
That's right.
When they beat UCLA.
People talk about Xavier Watts against USC 2 years ago as the greatest individual performance. No. You had to be in the Rose Bowl in 2007 to see Mo Crum.
I like
Ray Lewis.
I like Mo
Winless,
Crum.
right? 0-6.
Mo Crum in
they're
the
0-5,
coaching.
0-6.
Yeah.
Mo Crum in the coaching world. Where is he, JB? You know that. Check your Rolodex.
He was at Ole Miss last year. Now I forget where he's slid off to at this point in time.
I gotcha. All right, we're going to wrap up there. This has been today's edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. We'll be back on Thursday, January 27th. Until then, I'm Tim Priest with Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of Football Scoop, and Pete Sampson from The Athletic. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider.